Hello there, partner. Rashid here from Vaughan College of Aeronautics and Technology, and welcome to my talk show. I call this a talk show because we have a special guest here today with us who is going to join us in the discussion. He's a pilot with a background in engineering and also a part-time musician. He flew a DC-9, a Boeing 767, 757, and a 747, and an A300. He is most experienced with 14 CFR Part 121, 135, and 141. He is currently a CFI at Vaughan College, working as a part-time instructor, and he is none other than your Mr. Alan Emerson. Mr. Emerson, welcome aboard. How are you today?
Very good, thank you.
For the people who don't know you, tell us a bit more about yourself from your own perspective.
Well, I started out when I was young. I started taking flying lessons as a senior in high school, but I went to college to be an electrical engineer. When I graduated college, I actually worked in engineering for about 2.5 years. But in the meantime, I began flight instructing, and I found that I loved flying so much that I decided to make it my career.
Again, thank you for coming here and making a time for this to happen. I appreciate it. So as you already know from the title of the video, ladies and gentlemen, our topic of discussion today is Comair Flight 3272. Unfortunately, this is the tragic accident that happened on January 9th, 1997. This flight was inbound for Detroit Metropolitan Wayne County Airport in Detroit from Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport in Kentucky. The airplane was a 5-year-old Embraer 120 RT Brasilia, registered as November 265 Charlie Alpha. So just so you all know, we're gonna play a little video of the accident, but before that happens, I want you all to make yourselves familiar with just 4 things. Number 1, de-icing boots. 2, approach briefing. 3, autopilot altitude pre-select arm. And 4, autopilot altitude hold mechanism. If you go into the video knowing these things, it'll help you get the best picture right off the bat. I'll tell all y'all each of them is, don't worry, no need to Google these right now. Just pay real close attention. Here we go. The de-icing boots are a form of mechanical development that allows the airplanes leading it to get rid of ice coatings that formed on the airfoil. We also have a video that shows how the de-icing works. Let's watch it now. The approach briefing, according to Airline Pilot Hiring YouTube channel, is a portion of the approach checklist which ensures that you know the weather, NOTAMs, how you're going to do the approach, radios, and missed approach right before you go into your approach phase of the flight. Autopilot altitude pre-select arm and altitude hold mechanism are self-explanatory. The pre-select allows the pilot to pick an altitude to which he or she intends the aircraft to reach, while the hold mechanism holds the aircraft at that altitude. Alright, enough said. Let's jump into the video. Again, this is Comair Flight 3272, January 9th, 1997.
Indicator. Power.
Auto pilot.
Holy shit! Don't fucking die!
Remember those 4 things that I told you guys to keep in mind a couple minutes ago? Well, the reason why the accident took place was because those 4 things were not being handled or carried out properly. The pilots hesitated to turn the de-icing boots on when the airplane definitely had ice coatings on the leading edge of the wings. That's number one. Number two, their approach briefing was actually interrupted by ATC during the initial and the most essential part of the briefing, which was the beginning part, because that part specifically contained reminders about weather, NOTAMs, how to execute the approach, radios, and last and foremost, the autopilot altitude preselect arm and altitude hold mechanism were still on, even though the aircraft began to bank more than 30 degrees as a result of that initial stalling. If the pilots would have noticed that the aircraft was in more than 30 degrees of bank because of that initial stall, the pilots would have turned the autopilots off right away because the autopilots could have made the situation even worse. But in this accident, the pilots did not turn the autopilots off, since the pilots had not been careful and situationally aware enough to notice that until it was too late when the airplane was already in a 90 degrees of bank because it had icing and therefore stalling. So the autopilots definitely had something to do with the plane's attitude the moment it began stalling and going over the 30 degrees bank limit. Probably made the situation even worse is all I'm saying. So if we now incorporate the Swiss cheese air model and shell model, we can see that the primary breach of protection took place when the pilots did not turn the de-icing boots on in the icing condition. The second breach of protection took place when the pilots accidentally skipped over the initial part of the approach briefing, which is told to be the most important part because it would have reminded them the significance of the de-icing boots in that situation. And the final breach took place when the autopilots contributed in favor of the excess bank and stall since they were not turned off immediately by the pilots. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you now, Mr. Emerson. Any initial thoughts?
Well, I think the accident points out the need for the cockpit crew to understand the systems on the aircraft, understand how they relate to whatever the weather conditions are. It sounds like not uncommon weather-related, ice-related type of accident. It's curious to me that you didn't hear any discussion of the icing conditions. Regardless of the use of the checklists, your basic situational awareness should keep you alert as to what the weather conditions are and what do you need to be doing with the aircraft. And it sounds like the crew wasn't doing that for some reason.
So one of the other things that we discuss in human factors course, FLT 345, is that how can we mitigate the accident from happening? That is of course incorporating Swiss cheese error model and shell model. To begin, I would definitely say that I would be more situationally aware and say, okay, we're already in icing condition, plus we're about to descend through a gigantic layer of cloud where the temperature was definitely below 5 degrees Celsius. Let me just turn on the de-icing boots and keep it on until we are 100% secured and away of that icing environment. If I were to get interrupted by ATC during a time when I'm doing an approach briefing, then I'm definitely either telling ATC to stand by or handing off the briefing checklist to my captain and tell them to do it all over again and not to continue from where I left off, just so that it's also being double checked on everything that I already checked while I comply with ATC as well. Speaking of instrument condition, I have to begin cross-checking, interpreting instrument, and controlling the aircraft based on what the instruments tell me the moment I am IFR. There is no way I would take my eyes off the attitude indicator for more than 5 seconds, let alone letting the plane bank in more than 30 degrees with autopilots on and not paying attention to the attitude indicator. Impossible. So I would definitely make sure that I'm on procedure of doing those things to mitigate accident like this from happening. So how would you mitigate the accident, Mr. Emerson?
One thing I thought of was, if possible, to have done the approach briefing at a much higher altitude. It sounds like they were doing the approach briefing, or trying to do it, in the process of getting vectored around the approach itself. If they could have done the briefing possibly at cruise altitude before the top of descent, it would have been a less busy time to do it. They would have had more time to think it through, and then they would have had more time just to fly the airplane down low.
In addition, the aircrafts, the Embraer 120's flight manual profusely established not to go below 160 knots of airspeed in icing condition, but the pilots complied with ATC when the ATC told them to slow down to 150 knots, which was 10 knots even less than what they were restricted to in that icing condition. That definitely contributed to the accident, their lack of situational awareness of the aircraft's limitation by complying with ATC to go below 160 knots in icing condition, which was a human factor, contributed to the accident as well. You got anything to add, Mr. Emerson?
The one thing that wasn't discussed, which might have been a factor, would have been fatigue. That could very likely have played a role in the situation. I just think that it's important to maintain a sense of awareness, as you keep bringing up, in addition to running the checklist, doing crew briefings, listening to ATC, but they seem to have lost that big picture, especially obviously concerning the ice.
So, realizing that the pilots lacked situational awareness and seeing that there were a handful of ways with which the pilots could have turned the situation around at least, it is absolutely clear that this accident was human factor related, and we saw how the accident came to be and how could it be prevented from happening. Because of the ice, the smooth flow of the air over the wings were choked off way earlier than a regular stall, and the aircraft crashed right in Monroe, Michigan, and killed all 29 souls on board. With that being said, I would like to conclude this video. Thank you, Mr. Emerson, for being in this video. It was a pleasure.
You're very welcome.
And to you guys, be safe, and thanks for watching.